All right, can you all hear me? Good. So my name is Doug Plata. I'm a urgent care physician and president and founder of the Space Development Network, a free-to-join space advocacy organization focused on projects, organizing people into working groups on a variety of topics. So the topic that I want to address with you right now is achieving full self-reliance 15 years earlier. Well, earlier than what? Earlier than Elon Musk anticipates achieving that on Mars, which would be 2050. I'm suggesting as early as 2035. So that's, in a nutshell, what this is about. So as I'm sure most everybody here is a avid follower of Elon Musk, every tweet that he sends out or statement. So Elon has described his effort for Mars as achieving two major goals. And one of them is basically, a great future, an exciting future, something you want to wake up in the morning and say, wow, this is awesome that there's people on the moon and Mars. This is the future, that we have watched on TV and read in novels and, sci-fi. So that's one, and it's a very positive sort of motivation. But his second is, it's good to have a self-sustaining city on Mars because something might happen on Earth. And I specifically put up biotech because self-replicating technology is by far, like multiple orders of magnitude, greater risk than natural disasters such as an asteroid. It's just statistically speaking. Before the end of the century, we're gonna be facing all sorts of self-replicating technology available to graduate students. They can gene printers and chemical, things to produce chemicals that could produce a chemical ecophage and these sorts of things. Statistically, we are not going to be hit by an asteroid that we will not be able to deflect by the end of the century. That's just the reality. Same thing with supervolcanoes and whatnot. Okay, so how does Elon plan on having the great future and ensure the survival of humanity? We all know he wants to have a fleet of starships. He doesn't think small. It's like, the airlines of the solar system. So 1,000 starships every 26 months heading off to Mars. 100 people per starship in the first version of Starship. So how is it going? Well, he says this about his end goal. He says, I hope there's a self-sustaining city on Mars in 20 years, and that city has to survive, very importantly, if resupply ships stop coming from Earth for any reason whatsoever, okay? So, of course, we think of like asteroid, but there could be rather mundane reasons why the starships stop. There's an economic collapse on Earth. Elon gets shot by some crazy person, he has a heart attack. We could think of any number of reasons why the ships would stop. And then what about the city on Mars? If it's not self-sustaining and the ships are not arriving, whatever the city's dependent upon is going to be lacking, and it will not be able to survive if it can't produce everything for itself. So how is it going? I feel like things are going pretty well towards Elon's goals. Starship is being developed, perhaps a little bit slower than what we all would like, but it is moving forward for sure. Hopefully by the end of this year, there'll be the first orbital test. We'll see. The testing is sort of going on, making progress there. So I feel like at least getting the Starship going, that there's certainly hope there. I feel like this is a significant building, the Mega Bay. It would be able to hold, I get different numbers, but like simultaneous development of 8 to 12 starships being built simultaneously in the Mega Bay. And he really is, this thing, if it's not done, it's close to being done in terms of construction. He really is working hard towards getting that fleet. This is real. Now, 2022 to 2050, if the number of ships going to Mars in the next available window, 2024, if he's able to, at the end of this year or beginning of next year, get to orbit and then start doing the Starlink launches and getting a high flight rate. He's the richest man in the world, so there's probably the funding, probably not going to run out of funding. 2024, I could easily imagine 12 Starships heading to Mars and spread out by 2 or 3 days, and they hit the atmosphere and they make one attempt and they crash. The telemetry is sent back, the software is changed. The next one enters the atmosphere a few days later, makes another attempt, another attempt, another attempt, until, you know, a fairly good chance they're going to figure out the software if that's all it is. If they all crash, they get the telemetry back and they go ahead and change the hardware. So in 2026, you have multiple attempts. What are the odds that with all of those attempts in 2024 and 2026, that SpaceX is going to figure it out and is going to start landing cargo, you know, large amounts of cargo, so that when people arrive in 2029, is what Elon says, that they are oversupplied with supplies, and there's a fairly decent chance that they'll land safely because they have been able to master safe landing of the cargo ships. 2029 might be early, but I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility. And then after that, if SpaceX can go ahead and crank out the Starships and just keep adding to the fleet, Elon would need 20 years, from like 2030 to 2050, at 1,000 Starships per year to be able to get to a population of a million, which is his goal. And so this is the plan. This is and he is definitely working on that. So somewhere around 2031 is when 1,000 ships will be going, and then 2050 is when his goal is to have the self-sustaining city on Mars. What I'm suggesting is I think there's a different way of achieving the goal of not just a big city, but specifically full self-reliance. And I'm going to suggest much earlier it could be done. And in my presentation, I'll explain how I think it can be done. Okay, but let me start with some definitions. What is self-reliance? This is not a dictionary definition. This is just my practical definition. Providing for yourself those things that you need from local resources rather than depending upon having those things shipped to you from somewhere else, such as the Earth. Okay. We can measure self-reliance as a percent self-reliance. If you everything has to be shipped to you, you're 0% self-reliant. If you produce everything from local resources, you're 100%. And by mass, if you still need 50% of your mass shipped to you, then you're 50% self-reliant. Pretty straightforward. Okay. You can also say self-reliance is general or it's specific. And I think Elon is going for general, and what I'm suggesting is going for specific. And these things are not incompatible. You can pursue both. But I do believe specific self-reliance can be achieved more quickly. So general is sort of using vague terms. It's like you have a city because we live in cities and we survive, therefore you need a city to survive. I'm not sure that's good logic, but or saying that, well, our life in our city, you know, we use iPhones, so we're going to need iPhones to survive on Mars, or something of that nature. So it's basically saying, how do we achieve it? We achieve it just by general technological advancement and development until we are able to supply everything that we need. Specific self-reliance is saying, okay, let's take a look at the relevant factors. What specifically do you need to achieve full self-reliance? And then focus on what is the minimum way for you to go ahead and achieve each of those individual specific things. And that's the approach that I'm using. Okay. Let me introduce a concept of sufficient supply, because this is sort of an intermediate step, which I think is significant. Let's say if you got to the point where you're producing your water, you're producing your food, you're producing plastic, so you've got plastic parts. Let's say that you're producing 50% of your mass. Okay, it's sort of the easy stuff to produce. Okay, and then what you do is you sufficiently supply yourself with things like integrated circuits, you know, computer chips and electronics, and those things that are really difficult to produce. but you way oversupply your little colony at that point, okay? And then for whatever reason, the starships stop. Well, you can survive off your supplies for a while, okay? But eventually the supplies will run out. But if you can go ahead and continue with those, using the supplies, but continue to implement pre-developed technology protocols to develop the things that you had in store that you're using up, it buys you time so that by the time they run out, you're already producing those more difficult to produce parts, okay? And to give an example of this, of really how realistic this is, imagine delivering a 1 cubic meter box, and it is packed to the gills with the latest, greatest CPUs, okay? How many CPUs could you fit in that box? My, back of the envelope calculation is about 2,000, okay? Which seems reasonable. How long, do we throw away our computers because the CPU is burned out? No, never. It keeps working after 15 years, let's say. We throw it away because there's something better, right? So how long would these CPUs last? How long would 2,000 CPUs last, a small colony? It could be many, many years, maybe even centuries, okay, before you run out of supplies. So it is possible to go ahead and have sufficient supply to buy you time, okay? But does it buy you time to be able to produce the latest, greatest AMD CPU? No, it buys you enough time to make good enough replacements. Not the most high tech, but good enough, okay? I have, for example, a rover. Do you need a really advanced rover that we might be able to develop and send, on the Starship? But at the end of your technology development, could you at least develop something? It wouldn't be like this, but could you develop a rover that didn't require integrated circuits, electronics? It's electrical. It has batteries, it has wires, it has steering wheels, It's good enough. It's going to get you around. It's 4 wheels, but it's not necessarily has a flat screen and all of that, okay? So when it comes to percent self-reliance, there's, on the one hand, there's good news. And on the other hand, there's more good news. And I'll explain what I mean by that. So the good news is that typically the easy to produce materials also tend to take up the largest bulk. And the other good news is that the hard to produce high information parts like electronics, those tend to be harder to produce, but they also weigh less. In fact, if you look at the shipping cost of like a CPU, it can be like $5. It can be even less expensive than it costs to produce it on Earth. Why? It's because the mass is so small. It's a small percentage of a kilogram. Okay. Okay. So let's talk about specific self-reliance. So I don't know if this is the complete list, but I've thought about what are the components to achieve self-reliance. What do you need? And I've broken it up to, if you don't have these things, you're going to die immediately, like minutes to hours, or intermediately, like days to months, or it's going to take a while before you die, and that's later or years, okay? So if you don't have air pressure, how long until you die? Like, I don't know. Is it 6 minutes or something like that? It's oxygen. How about temperature control? How long does it take you to freeze in space, and die by that? Okay. If you have no power, well, there's your heater or whatever. Okay. Electronics, I don't know if it should be in immediate or intermediate, but if you're not able to produce it, depends on if you have supplies or not. It might be intermediate or later. Okay. When do they break down? Okay. And you go on, well, if you have no water, then in days you're going to die. Same thing with food, is getting into more like a month or so. Equipment reproduction, rather important. If you're not able to get metals and produce the equipment, eventually you are going to die, okay? And that sort of underpins a lot of everything else. And then you can go on down the list. Some things like translocation, if you establish yourself somewhere and you're not able to move elsewhere, then you'll get hit by a meteor eventually. It might be centuries or millennia, but eventually you do need to move ultimately, but that's going to take years. Okay, two foundations to full self-reliance, I would say, is power and parts. If you have power and parts, you need that to be able to produce the green hab to go ahead and grow the food. You need it to produce the equipment to extract the organics from the atmosphere and the water, okay, from the ice below you. And so we need to find solutions to that. So as I've thought through this, there's probably more ways of producing powers, but just the three that come to mind quickly are nuclear, photovoltaic, and concentrated sunlight and Stirling engines. And you could also have light tubes for lighting, for like greenhouses. Nuclear, I sort of just write that off as a good choice for the easiest way to achieve full self-reliance, because you gotta get the nuclear material, you've got to build the nuclear reactor, and I think that's just going to be a lot more difficult than making Stirling engine, for example. Photovoltaics, you might think that's pretty advanced technology, but I think this one's actually doable. Alex Ignatieff, professor at University of Houston, actually took lunar regolith and produced working photovoltaic cells just from that. I imagine a similar thing could be done with Martian regolith. And then concentrated sunlight and Stirling engines, if you can make mirrors, and then most of you are probably familiar with these very efficient engines, the Stirling engines, to be able to move permanent magnets and be able to produce power in the form of electricity. Okay, what about producing parts? My suggestion is, unlike the moon, I think the moon and Mars are going to be pretty different in this respect. And that is that I think using air and water, you can produce plastics, and that's going to be a pretty nice and easy source of material. I would say as much as possible, make things out of plastic on Mars. And then a source of metals. I believe that the easiest source of metals will be these nickel iron meteorites, which are quite abundant on the surface of Mars. I'm going to be presenting at 4 o'clock, and I'm going to go into that in detail to explain. But for a self-reliant little colony, I think this might be the simplest form of unoxidized metals that come in nice bite-sized chunks. And then you go through, wow, what happened there? And then you go through taking the meteorites, use metallurgy to pour, roll, and form, etc., like pour rocks to make, pour blocks in molds to make different things, and then machine it to produce a variety of parts. That sort of shows some of my thinking in terms of how you can produce all of the parts that you need to reproduce your base within like 20 years as your population grows. Okay, are integrated circuits actually necessary? Do you need it to extract water? If you do this rod well thing where you put a pipe down and pump steam or hot water and just keep melting a larger and larger glacier under you, I don't think you need an integrated circuit to do that. Do you need it for chemical production? There's all sorts of timers that don't need integrated circuits, thermostats, these sorts of things. Meteorite recovery, I think you can actually construct a rover that doesn't need integrated circuits. I mean, we did it up until what, the 60s or 70s. And then machining equipment, it's awfully nice to have a CNC machine that uses integrated circuits, but it's doable. It's still doable even manually, or there's some sort of mechanical ways of reproducing parts from patterns. Okay, radiation. Go ahead and use probably water on Mars, but you could also use regolith, which is readily available. And just cover your habitats deep enough to give yourself the radiation protection. Yeah, you could tunnel underneath. I just think covering with regolith is just the easiest way if you look at the whole perspective. And then growing food. This is it's doable. It's a challenge. It's going to consume a lot of the residents' time. But there's a really interesting debate as to whether it should be 2D growing with clear roof and use natural sunlight, which has obviously distinct advantages. But then exposing your people to radiation is a problem as they fix things or harvest and plant. So in my organization, we have an agriculture working group. We actually think 3D growing and then actually LEDs we think can be produced, and aluminum wires and photovoltaics would be the way that we would. 5 minutes until Q&A, or 5 minutes until Q&A? Okay. Our agriculture working group actually looked at hydroponics versus other methods, and we felt we want to keep regolith out of the habitats, both on the moon and Mars, for different reasons. We think taking rocks, sort of washing them and then grinding them and then mixing it with organics to produce soils is perhaps the best approach for it. It's sort of a hybrid. You can still have nutrient solution thrown through this granular material. This is something that I would like to see either our Space Development Network or the other organization actually demonstrate in an analog setting the full nutrition production for a small initial permanent crew to demonstrate that this is doable. Because I think we're going to need to know how to do it on that scale fairly soon. Artificial gravity, of course, a great question as to is 3/8 gravity sufficient by itself? I think if it comes to an issue of this full self-reliance, the issue becomes more not so much survival as it is, not so much health as it is survival. So although ethically we may not be able to raise children in a 3/8 G, especially gestation, but also perhaps childhood, if you are looking at the question of survival, perhaps having less than ideal health, but survival would be a sort of a backup goal, if you can understand that. Genetic survival, how small can your little colony be? If you take a look at the history of colonization of islands in the South Pacific, it suggests it's not a large number. But the cool thing is we can take a very large number just in the form of frozen gametes or embryos. And that would be a way that a very small group could have the genetic material to achieve minimum viable population. So you don't have a genetic collapse. And studies, it seems as though if you freeze it down to like liquid nitrogen temperature, the viability rate of embryos frozen from like the 70s, they don't seem to become less viable over time. So that's encouraging. And then what I would also add to that is to help this little survival colony to be able to grow and reestablish humanity on a large scale is, yes, you do have your protocols to implement for full self-reliance, but also something like microfiche or something like that has sort of curated information that people donate from the internet, and so that the settlers will have a tremendous amount of information that they can look to at resources. They don't have to research and develop everything again, reinvent the wheel. So that's my presentation about full self-reliance, and I open the floor for questions. Should I repeat the question for the people watching? Oh, you'll be on the, okay, great.
So when you talk about self-reliance, it's very foreseeable to see how you can do all simple things, how we can make those. But in any kind of advanced industrial society, you start getting a lot of little very exotic convention computers. But they're also, rare earths, they're exotic chemicals, they're branded chemicals like the medicines and so forth. And a lot of them require a lot of machinery to make as opposed to shipping. You said you're an emergency physician, right?
Urgent care, yeah.
Urgent. So if you went into the pharmacy and medical care of a hospital and looked at the machinery required to build them all, it would be more than a soup animal. So how do you address that aspect that last 1% of exotic, strange or frangible chemicals and compounds?
Okay. So I try to be clear, but let me answer that, because that's a common question. Do you need medication to survive? But many don't, right? I mean, people have gone through history without using medicines, and as populations they survived. Do you need rare earth elements to have an electrically based rover?
No.
Well, you say yes, somebody says no. I mean, do you need that for a battery for well, if you use on either side of silicon, you can have positive and negative in terms of phosphorus and potassium. So could you make a base, not a 30% efficiency, but 3% efficiency? Could you make it with non-exotic materials? I'm not sure. If the answer is yes, then we'll go with Stirling engines. So my point is, if we're trying to achieve full self-reliance without needing to have an industrial civilization, but a small survival colony, then I'd say let's look for solutions that don't require all of those advanced manufacturing and rare earth elements and things like this. Yeah. Oh, I mean that's my hypothesis, and that's what I'm putting out there, saying more. I'd like for people to take a look at this question and see, is there a way of doing it? Got a question down here? Oh, sorry.
It's really been a tremendous developer of essential ideas that I don't find everybody thinking about the way you can. Now the question is that are we really utilizing everything that's available to us at Mars, but on Earth, because there is a lot of material coming out of the sun. We think of the sun as a source of energy, but we don't think of it as a source of materials. And so have you given thought to the possibility of extracting material from the solar wind? Because there are a lot of cations coming out of the sun, and mostly cations. The electrons accompany cation released from the sun, so set back to the sun and repackaged more. There's a limited number of electrons available in the heliosphere, and so the cations recombine with anions.
I think you're ahead on me on that. I have not given that any consideration. I'm not even sure how that would be done. But
Red earth matters already been found on this.
okay, there we go. Yeah.
Would you agree with the proposition, the old Russian proverb that says, bad news, the enemy of good enough?
Yeah.
We look at just things that are good enough on Mars. For one thing, we went to the moon as a slide of space.
Yeah.
And the Saturn V, of course, we've advanced tremendously. I'm very grateful that we have, but part of this has been at the cost of analysis paralysis. We tend to over computationalize everything.
I think we had, for example, high strength metals really purified to have really good and rigid habitats, that are made. That'd be awesome. But if that is a problem, then I'd say, can we make a habitat out of polyethylene or some other plastic that's much more easy and just bulk it up thick? I don't know. But yeah, looking for good enough.
Really interesting speech.
Thank you.
I was just wondering, like you were talking about early on, there who would be delivering supplies and the Chinese came running. And I've been hearing a lot of interesting terraforming ideas here. Might it not be a better idea to try the more dangerous terraforming ideas before people get there?
So I have presented at Mars Society Convention before about paraterraforming, which I think is far superior to terraforming, because paraterraforming, large greenhouses basically, is something you can have immediately is attached to habitats, and you can expand it. You can use local materials to expand terraformed areas, and you get that Earth-like atmosphere immediately. So I'm pretty strongly feeling that terraforming is better than full terraforming. That's going to take an extremely long time and give you Earth atmosphere anytime soon. Okay, we're done. Okay,
Sorry.
thank you. I'll talk to you.